been purchased 30 years ago. Now it's worth maybe $50 million. I show it at $1 million. I don't know what the value of that is. I can't get the true value of your assets also. Sometimes your liabilities too.
That would be especially true in case of an electronic goods company, because the price of electronics decreases.
Yep.
So it's not always increase, it could be a decrease in the price too.
Think about what kind of business. That's a horrible business, isn't it? Just think about it. A TV maker. I can buy it for $1,000 now, but if I wait like 6 months, it'll be like $500. You don't want that kind of business, do you? You want a business where your prices are doing what? Increases, right? So, collection of assets and investments, tangible cash. Here, property, plant, and equipment. Intangibles, intellectual property. Reputation, that's really hard to judge. Intellectual property, patents, how long does that last? Well, for pharmaceutical companies, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, depending upon pharmaceutical, right? And even if it is 8 years, guess what? The generic companies try to sue you after 7 years to try to get started early. What's that worth? It has some value. Is that a balance sheet? Yeah. Reputation. How do you put that on the balance sheet? Goodwill? No, goodwill's just market value of what I purchased a firm minus what?
It's net
Historical cost
assets.
of the firm, right? That's goodwill. I sound like an accountant, don't I? Goodwill. What's the likelihood that you're going to go to that place when you see a sign on the side of the road? Can you judge the worth of that? No, but is it worth something? Right. You see a Cracker Barrel sign, are you going to go there? Side of the road? You know what it is? You know what they have? Are you more likely to go there than someplace that's like a local generic family restaurant and you don't know what you'll get? Probably if you're out of town, right? What's the worth of that? Does Coke, does Pepsi have a value, a brand? What's it worth though? That's a problem, right? Can't quantify it, right? It's just like working in the software field. What are your assets? Well, you have software, but what are your real assets? The people, right? If they buy your firm, they more than likely want the people too that program it. Because just the software without the people that program it, guess what? That's where our economy is changing. We're becoming more of a service economy. Therefore, it's harder for us to see actual assets on the balance sheet, right? I'm not buying Google because they have a lot of assets on their balance sheet. Why am I buying Google? Because every time I click on that stupid thing, they make money, right? And they're smart, right? Now, if those software engineers start to leave, then they got a problem. Right? So, market value of equity minus the equals assets minus the market value of the debt and other liabilities. Okay. What's a liability that could be understated or that we don't see on the balance sheet?
What's a liability that? Sorry, what did you?
What's a liability that we wouldn't see on the balance sheet but we might see elsewhere? Like in the footnotes.
Contingency? Like contingencies, lawsuits, or,
Lawsuit. Sometimes you'd be surprised, and they have to apply the percentage of them losing that lawsuit and a value to it also. You'll not see that in the actual balance sheet itself. You have to look in the footnotes for that. Can that make a difference for you? Yeah.
But wouldn't the lawsuits decrease the cash flow within the company, and that would be reflected within the balance sheet statements?
Huge company, not enough to see it, you know? I mean, if you're Depends on how many attorneys you're hiring. Corporate attorneys usually don't do anything, so they have to hire outside staff.
But that would be shown as an expense, so it will still be
True.
reflected in the balance sheet.
Uh-huh. But you're not gonna see the actual liability value, which is really what you're concerned about. Unless you go to the actual footnotes area, which they'll say, we have a 50% chance of losing $20 million. Oh, okay, wow, I didn't know that. So they have to they're liable to, they have to estimate it as well. Which, if you don't read the footnotes, guess what? You don't know what's there. So are they hoping you don't do? Read, exactly. No reading, it's bad for you. Okay, Harrison Industries, an all-equity firm, perfect capital market. 50 million shares outstanding, $4 per share. What's their market cap? Well, it's 200 million. 50 million shares times 4 is 200 million. We're going to increase this leverage by borrowing 80 million to purchase 20 million of outstanding shares. So how is that going to work? Let's see. So we have what? 50. Times 4, right? This times that. So this is my market capitalization of my company, right? Now what are we going to do? We're going to borrow 80, and we're going to repurchase 20 million shares. So if we borrow 80, and we repurchase 20, what's the new structure going to look like? I'm going to take my 80,000 here, right, or 80 million, right? Which is the amount of borrowing. What am I going to do with that? I'm going to subtract that. So what's my equity worth now? 120 million. What's my debt?
80.
Make sense? Assuming the price stays the same, that's what it should look like. Okay? So, to sum that up, to that. So what's my percentages going to look like? Well, it's going to be 60% equity, right? Therefore, I should be what? 40% debt. If I could
Another
actually use
question.
Excel.
Another question.
Sure.
So the debt and the equity, that percentage, the sum is always equal to 1?
Say it again. Asked it, yep. Yeah, if it doesn't sum up to 1, you got a problem.
Because in one of the question in last week,
Okay. Homework?
not the homework, the postings,
Okay.
debt ratio was 55% and equity ratio was 35%.
Then we need a preferred of 10% somewhere.
Okay, it was not mentioned.
Okay. Because there's got to be a preferred, how does that keep doing that?
So is it
That's what it
always debt plus equity?
Yes, and preferred would be a separate category.
So debt plus equity plus preferred equal to 1.
Most firms don't have preferred,
Okay.
but it should equal to 1. If it doesn't, we're missing something, we did something wrong, or they forgot to include preferred.
But it cannot be greater than 1. Okay, so some,
So there's no structure, now what happens? Merchant purchases to shares. Let's take a look at what it looks like. Initial, 200, 200. Now I have 80 in cash after borrowing. What do I do with that cash? Buy shares back, right? So now I got 30 million times 4, which is the 120, and I also have 80 million. Okay? That was my all-equity firm. Liabilities grow by 80 million. Makes my balance sheet more risky. Therefore, as an equity holder, what should I do? Expect a greater return, right? Okay, we said they did $80 billion. Shares repurchased. Leverage equity cost. Okay. Leverage equity cost of capital. Equity plus debt equals the unlevered firm, U, which equals the market value of the assets. Not the book value, not the historical cost, the market value of the assets. Okay. Equity divided by equity plus debt times the cost of equity plus debt plus equity plus debt times, what does that look like to you? It's like a weighted average cost of capital, doesn't it? With a firm that just has equity and debt, right? Okay. Here's how we would solve for cost of equity. RU unlevered plus debt divided by equity. RU minus RD, cost of debt. Okay. And there's the formula. So another way to look for the cost of equity is to use this formula here. I need the unlevered, I need the amount of debt, the amount of equity, I need the cost of the unlevered as well as the cost of the debt. Use this formula. That's Mobilier notes for proposition number 2. So, if the unlevered firm is 15% equity and with finance of $500 debt, the expected return of the debt is 5%. 50 divided by 50, 15% unlevered. Cost of equity, according to M&M proposition number 2, is 25%. I need to know unlevered, I need to know the ratio of debt to equity, and I need to know what? Cost of my debt too. When we say cost of debt, we can mean return on debt. Cost of debt, return on debt are interchangeable. Okay. If I'm the investor, I'm looking for the return on debt. If I'm the owner of the bond or the seller of the bond, then what am I focused on? The cost, right? Weighted average cost of capital. You guys remember this, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Weighted average cost of capital equals cost of the unlevered, which equals the assets, cost of assets. Weighted average cost of capital. Debt to value ratio. Look what happens the more debt I take on. What happens to equity cost? Increases. Why? Firm's getting more risky, right? Once it hits 15%, look, it's off the charts for me. The more debt I take on, the more costly it gets. Therefore, the more my equity cost of capital should rise. The investors are expecting more. No debt, WACC equal to unlevered cost of capital. We're using beta. Beta of equity is easy to find. Easily. How do we find it? Go to Yahoo Finance, look at key statistics, there's beta. How do we find the beta of the debt? It would have to be given to us in a problem. The beta of the debt should be less than the beta of the equity. It should be less risky. So what I'm looking for here is what? The beta of the unlevered firm, which would be the beta of the weighted average cost of capital also. Measure of risk. The higher the unlevered beta, the more risk I'm taking. Breaks down to this again. Debt divided by equity. Beta of the unlevered minus beta of the debt. So, CVS, we've seen those before, right? 0.8 debt, or I'm sorry, equity. 0.10 debt to equity ratio. Okay. So how do we figure out what would its equity beta be after it increases leverage? Plug it in. 73 plus 0.5 debt to equity ratio times 0.73. That was 0. The beta of the equity now will be increased to 1.09. We said the more debt we take on, what happens to the beta of equity earlier? And that proves it. Any questions? I'll take a break.